for like my fiance. So, and you've met Yvonne, so I'm like, oh.
Yes, I love it.
All right, so we are live.
Hey.
Brittany, I probably should ask you this before we went live. Is there any way you could turn your volume up a little bit, or?
Yeah.
I don't know if
Got
that
it?
helps. Yep, that does help a little bit. All right, awesome.
Cool. Hi.
So we're just gonna get started because we know that people come and go, and I don't even remember how to tell on YouTube whether or not somebody's in here.
I can't tell.
Yeah, so I was like, I know maybe a number comes up next to the live.
It shows on your end.
But it's probably it's been so long since we've been on live. I don't on YouTube live. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. Oh, let me pull up because I can't look at it on my phone like I typically do. But if you are watching the replay, thank you for joining us. For everybody else, it'll be edited down a little bit, but for the people on YouTube, they'll get to see all the behind the scenes like Facebook normally does.
Yeah, that's part.
You're the lucky ones. So we are going to go ahead and get started. You ready, Eliza? Okay. Hey, y'all. Welcome back to Between Sessions. My name is Ebony Harris.
And I'm Eliza Bokeen. And we are two brown chicks changing the face of therapy on both sides of the couch.
Thank you so much for joining us this week. We have been doing a stream of videos with just me and Elisa. And so we now have a guest that we are so excited about. Elisa's going to introduce her because she's a classmate who is doing big things right now. And so Elisa, tell us a little bit about how you know Brittany and what you know about her.
Yeah, so Brittany and I actually met in grad school. We both attended University of Houston Clear Lake. Go Hawks. And we were both in the marriage and family therapy program together. You know, I went back, I've shared before, I went to back to school later on in life, so I kind of took this mama bear position. So it's been so cool to see all of the amazing things that Brittany's doing. So Brittany is actually a doctoral student out there in California at the Alliant International University. She specializes in grief and bereavement. She's also trained in collaborative language systems. You've been out of California for a couple of years, right?
Yes, I've been for 5.
5 years, more than a couple, right? A couple of couples. She's also focuses on intersectionalities, trauma, Black and Latinx communities. And you are recently co-authored a couple of chapters in a new book called Black Panther Psychology. Yeah. So I can't wait to hear all about this.
Yeah, it's a lot. Where do you want me to start?
So start by you telling us a little bit about the work that you do out there in California. Let's start there.
For sure. So I am currently the lead TAY clinician, which TAY is transitional age youth. So I work with exclusively 18 to 25-year-olds from a range of co-occurring substance abuse to trauma, sexual abuse, or a litany of things. So it's been pretty exciting. I've been the lead for about a year and a half now, and I've worked at the same community. I work at Maria Salinas Wellness and Recovery Center, and it's a very unique experience where 95% of our clinicians are people of color.
Awesome.
And so I think that is so different than anything I've ever been with. And 90 to 95% of our clinicians are bilingual or trilingual.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah. Right.
Wow.
Are you from Texas?
I was born in Austin, and then I grew up majority in Indiana.
Oh, okay. Because I'm just thinking if you're from this area, then you know how like crazy and different that is. I mean, like the bilingual thing, not so much, but the people of color and trilingual, and yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm from Indiana, so that
right.
Literally, I work about I work 2 exits away from the border. So
okay.
How far?
From what?
What did you say? How far are you from the border?
2 exits.
Oh yeah! Wow.
So that's another reason why they wanted to. I have a wonderful director, and he really wanted make sure that the community here is representative of who we serve. And so every single person in our admin community is Spanish speaking. Every single person is a person of color. I think that we have, I'm the only African American individual here. We have two individuals who are Pacific Islander, Asian descent, and then everyone else is Spanish speaking,
Wow.
Puerto Rican or Mexican or anything, something else.
Wow. That's so impressive. And what a novel idea that there be representation.
Right.
Who knew it was so important?
Right. And I'm sure it has a huge impact on the transition in people that are coming through, that are at that age of like trying to figure out life, and to be able to see different people that look like them is amazing.
Right.
I think it's nice too because it feels safe. We have individuals who are undocumented. We have individuals who have been in positions where their family doesn't speak English, and they know that they can come here and call on the phone and talk to their psychiatrist in Spanish, and they can talk to their nursing staff all in Spanish, and that they feel more comfortable and more like empowered to be like in something that already has so much stigma in the communities of color, to feel like this is such an escape to my family doesn't believe in mental health.
Right.
And my mom doesn't even know I'm here, or something else like that. Like it's been a really wonderful community, and it's also helping like the people who are monolingual, like we'll have group provisions in Spanish.
Wow.
And so like it's awesome because it's a really, really unique experience and great thing for me to learn, to integrate. And so if I have a client who's like, I don't know how to say this in English, I'm like, tell me in Spanish. Like, so that I have to work too. And so it pushes me, and it also like builds this therapeutic alliance, which is so profoundly unique. I don't think I would have had this anywhere else.
That's amazing. Wow, that's so wonderful. We got to get out there and visit.
It's pretty cool. I've never, and this sounds really cheesy, but I've never been happier somewhere.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's a gift.
It's a good community. I like the fellow clinicians. I like my bosses. I like the community that we've kind of built. We have a going away party, like a potluck at noon today. Like it's a real community, and so it's kind of cool. Like it's great. I like it. I'm very fortunate.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So, as Eliza stated, you co-authored a couple chapters of a book, Black Panther Psychology. So, can you tell us a little bit about that and what you kind of added to the book and what the book is about as a whole?
Sure. So it was one chapter, so I wanted to clarify that. But maybe next time. So I want to give a little bit of information or background on why there's like Black Panther psychology.
Right.
So one of my colleagues, Billy San Juan, he's a Filipino descent. He is wonderful and introduced me to pop culture psychology. And what that is his friend made a dissertation on working with veterans who had PTSD. And she is a self-proclaimed nerd and using it in a good way. And she wanted to create something that assisted with individuals with PTSD who had this kind of superhero complex of I'm so strong and I'm stripped away from these powers. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the original dissertation, what was about 4 or 5 years ago, was on superhero or Superman and veterans. And so since then it's published and it has like exploded. She's doing international tours now. It's this pop culture psychology phenomenon that's really, really cool. So it integrates pop culture and psychology, which is really unique and interesting. She has since gone on to do work with like Harry Potter therapy. There's Daredevil therapy. There's it goes. There's a list of them. And so Black Panther was the one that was this year, and that's the one I got to contribute to.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so my chapter, which I co-authored with Billy San Juan, we decided to write on grief and loss, of the experience of death and dying, and how it molded the characters. And so, if you think about it, for people who haven't seen it, Killmonger and Black Panther both experienced the death of a parent, particularly the death of their father. And it really shows how circumstance affects grief.
Mm.
Circumstance in the sense of religiosity, circumstance in the sense of socioeconomic status, circumstance and family support, and all of these other things, these intersections that affect how you grow as a human being and how you develop as a person. And so you have this villain in Killmonger who had to adapt without a father in a world that wasn't supportive to him, and you see the humanity of him as opposed to seeing him as a bad person because he was responding from grief.
Mm.
And then you have Black Panther, who is or T'Challa, who is the main character and the hero, who has more supports and has more circumstantial things that affect his grief, and you see how they develop as characters, and you just see how they develop as men, and how this one experience with the death of a parent affects them. And I think that it was really important to me to best articulate like the experience of grief, because this is the one thing that happens for everyone. There's not a person in the human condition that will say that they lived a life that they didn't lose it. And like it's such an experience that is profound and handled differently for every single person, every single circumstance, and there are so many differing factors that's why it's so difficult to study.
Right.
Because even in the same family, the death of a brother might affect everyone differently.
Right.
Even in the same community, the death of a community member can be handled differently. And so I think that there's not enough attention paid to this unique circumstance. That's a phenomenon that's going to occur for everyone.
Right. And in many ways it can be misunderstood. It's kind of like you're describing the characters, right? Like how it can easily be misunderstood, and not really understanding how people cope with or process or don't process.
Or struggle.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
And
So,
I thought it was important because a little bit of background on me. I have no existing grandparents. I have my brother passed away when I was 10. My father passed away when I was 15, and my mom passed away when I was 21.
Oh, wow.
And then my sister just passed away in January.
Jeez.
So I like grief and loss, or death and dying, is such a profoundly sensitive topic to me, and I think that I'm extremely protective over it, because I know that when I lost my mom and like I played volleyball, my coaches threw me into therapy. The therapist was like didn't know what to do, and like, oh, you have a really sad story, and I'm like, I know.
Right.
I remember my first experience in therapy saying, and she just would Google, like, she's like, oh, my tire popped. Like, why don't you do this? Google tires with me. And then she'd throw me a grief book. And so there are so many clinicians and so many people in the world who can say like, oh, I'm trauma informed, or I know about grief and loss, and I study death and dying. And it's like, but you don't again, like, and it sounds like I'm on a rant, but I'm very protective of the topic, and I think that for clinicians to truly say that they want the field and that they respect and understand what grief and loss is, they need to do the work.
Yeah.
And so because it matters, right?
Right.
It's bigger than just saying, oh, like, I've read a couple things and I've seen a couple things, and I know that there's a lot of people who I've never taken a grief class. And it's cool.
Yeah.
Like, you have lifespan development, but you don't really work with it. And so every single publication that I've had, every single article that I've written, every single presentation I've had internationally and nationally has all been on grief. I'm certified in grief research. I'm certified in grief facilitation, and I think it's important
Let me ask you this, because you said that, and I completely agree with you, in that being one of those topics that I think just even as humans, we don't always know how to approach. And then as clinicians, kind of within our field, there's so many different areas that you feel like, well, I don't specialize in this or I don't specialize in that. But I like what you said, where it impacts all of us.
Yeah.
And so what do you recommend then for clinicians? Because you said for us to do the work, like what would you say that would look like? Like where can a clinician begin?
And I think that that's the difficult part, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can go to facilitator training. There are certifications in grief and loss. You can do that. You can Google it and look it up. There's a couple of really good programs. And then there's also continuing education units, right?
Sure.
And so having those things like refreshers of like what's the new and updated information, like for people who come in and say like, oh, the 5 stages of grief, like that's the hardest eye roll I have in my life, because that's not up to date on like what research is.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to me when people kind of walk through life and not know. And I think it's tough. It's a really big issue that isn't talked about and that is shied away from. Like you have to think about it in this Western world. You get what, 3 days for bereavement?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
3 days to get over it, to move on, to figure it out. So like when this loss could have, regardless if it's your pet or your parent or your sibling or your friend, like this could have been the most significant loss in your life.
Yeah.
And we don't, I don't know, we don't champion the people who are struggling. And I think that that's in any type of trauma. But in this Western world, we really think about move on, be strong, whatever that looks like.
Right.
And that's unrealistic. Like, and this experience is something that lasts with you forever, regardless if it's profound in the moment or if it's fleeting or if it ebbs and flows. Like it changes, it shifts as we do as people. And to answer your question, since I've gone on another tangent, it's one, being open-minded to learning and looking at research and studying new and findings. And it's also being open to knowing that you can be wrong.
Yeah.
And clients are going to come in and maybe they're struggling and it's been a year or it's been 2 or 10 and they're not over it. And that knowing that that's not wrong or that's not bad.
Sure.
And just exploring with them experience and exploring with them their uniqueness, because no two stories are the same. And if you walk in saying, oh, you know, I've worked with 5 clients who've lost their parents or 5 clients who've lost their child, like it's not the same. It can't.
Yeah, it's good.
I definitely, it's interesting because I feel like for a lot of therapists that kind of niche down, right, we get very protective of that. And I hear that with you, where it's kind of like, I've done this and like I can see the damage that can happen when people aren't properly trained to deal with these situations. But it sounds like also grief is one of those things that all therapists should get some type of training in and really should work with, because most people have dealt with it or will deal with it in their lives. And so if you have a client that comes for relationship issues or something, and then something happens, or they've had that in the past, it would be good to kind of have that also. Maybe I'm not going to get certified, but I need to have some type of awareness and knowledge so that I can work from that perspective.
Absolutely. Like, I think about like how many times are you going to have a couple that comes in for sexual issues and it stems from attachment injuries,
Right.
like,
Right.
And
Right.
we know that, we have some information about attachment. There are so many intersections of trauma and issues that develop, and I think that that's why, you know, particularly from my lens as being a family therapist, that it's like your social status and your socioeconomic status and your relationships, work status, like all of it affects you.
Right.
And so it makes sense to be knowledgeable of multiple topics. Like, not saying that you should only have like one expertise.
Right.
I'm not saying that's bad, but you should be knowledgeable of
Sure.
things.
Yeah.
They affect each other. And that's the fun part about like my dissertation. So I am writing on the intersectionality of sexuality and grief. And so I'm working with couples who experience, where one person experienced the death of a parent, and how that affects their sexuality. The first research paper is going to be on the bereaved individual, and the second is going to be on the person, the supporting partner. And so the biggest question when I presented in Puerto Rico was, when do you ask for sex again?
Mm.
Yeah.
When's it appropriate?
Yeah.
And what does your grief look like? Is this a burden to have sex again? Is it like, do you feel as connected? Do you want to feel as connected?
Right.
And so here's a perfect example of, they come in with a sexual issue, or they come in with some sexuality, and you see that it stems from something else.
Sure.
I wasn't feeling sexual at this time.
Right.
Or I didn't want to have sex at this time. Or, it's been a week, it's been a month, it's been 6 months. Like, when is my partner gonna get over it and be ready? So I think that because there are so many like overlapping variables, I think it's really important to be versed in a couple different things.
Love it. Love it.
I don't know. I don't want to go on a tangent, so let me just let this because I could easily go. So, can you tell us when we're talking about grief, and especially from a clinician's perspective, but even as a person that want to support someone who's going through grief at the time, like what are some misconceptions about how we handle grief? And I think you even mentioned in like the stages of grief. Like, can you talk about some of those beliefs or misconceptions that we have when it comes to grief?
Oh, for sure. For the stages of grief, I think that like in Kubler-Ross has like gone back and said that it's not linear, right? Like it's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I appreciate that information. However, I think that there is this idea that there's a process to it, and then at the end you're over it.
Mm-hmm.
That there is this idea that to be well is to be over it.
Mm-hmm.
To be well is to be functional and to be resilient and to be happy and to move on. And I don't think that is like, we're not normalizing the experience of loss.
Mm-hmm.
And I think something else that's like really, really important is this research topic is tough because there is a huge continuum. The continuum of people who have lost a spouse, partner, friend, pet, that it affects them. Nothing affects it has no effect, versus someone who is profoundly experiencing DSM, complex bereavement, and cannot function, and maybe goes to substance abuse or attachment injuries or something like that. Because the continuum is so large, it's difficult to like pinpoint what is appropriate. And having to know that there are going to be lots of different variables that affect grief. Something that I point out in the book is your spirituality affects your loss. So, for example, if you have a relationship to a higher power or something else like that, or if even if you are spiritual, not religious, that affects loss. When I say economic status, it's what kind of services were you able to get because of this loss?
Mm-hmm.
Get therapy. Could you go to a support group? Could you have the resources to reach out to other people, or were you culture affects grief, how it's said or how it's expressed. Like, for example, some Asian cultures don't necessarily validate the grieving experience. Jewish cultures who give a certain amount of time for like grief and loss, where you can like really profoundly be sad, and then there's kind of like a time to stop mourning. In American cultures, where you're supposed to celebrate this life and this homegoing service, and other, like, your culture affects how you experience it. Your gender affects how you experience it. For example, research has shown that men, particularly who have lost a parent, and especially their mother, tend to abuse substances more. And women more internalize their grief. I'm not saying that there's just a limit on gender identification for men and women. There's so many things that affect the experience of loss, and so many things that affect your experience of loss. Your age, right?
Yeah.
Imagine losing a parent at 14 versus 40.
Mm-hmm.
How do you handle it differently? Or how do you handle a sibling loss at 6 versus 60, when maybe one's more expected?
Right.
Type of loss. Is it traumatic? Was it a death by suicide? Was it a crash you never thought could happen? Was it a phone call that you got in the middle of the night that someone had a stroke?
Yeah.
So many different layers.
Yeah, like there's so many things that affect the experience of loss that again, that's why I say it's really, really tough to research. And I think that those are the misconceptions, that you just lose somebody and you're weak if you're not over it.
Right. There's a certain amount of time that you should be grieving and dealing with it and then moving on.
Yeah, and I think, and it goes back to, and I think, and culture. I don't want to say culture as in just like your ethnicity, because culture is so much bigger than that. It's your ethnicity, your religion, your region, and that you live in. That, like, there's so many things.
Right.
And so culturally, if I believe that I am a bad person, if I'm still crying at night 10 years later, how damaging is that to somebody?
Right.
We don't tell people who've experienced like sexual abuse to like move on. We don't tell people who have experienced like domestic violence to just like it's just going to be done.
Mm-hmm.
We know it's not. We know the impacts of these experiences. We know the impacts of trauma. It can be lifelong. And there are days where, and for myself, there are days where I'm fine and not thinking about it. And then there's Father's Day.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing that there are, because both my parents passed away the first week of March, so the 4th, and so I usually give myself like those days to like be heavy, and that's okay, and to have supportive parents and our supportive partners and supportive friends who experience like the grief rituals with me. Knowing that is normal and healthy, and that can be a good thing too. And so I think that there is this idea morbid to celebrate your grief, to say like, oh well, you're continuing the problem. And it's really cathartic to have these like grief rituals. I've worked with a couple of people who've lost a child, and so every day, and then the experience of having another baby, and how do they still celebrate that? No, there are 2 kids in my family.
Sure.
There's more. It's not just you. Like, you had a big brother. You know what?
More than
celebrating those anniversaries is important.
Right.
More than anything, I just hear you saying that this is something that is ongoing, right? There is no necessarily an end to it. It can impact, it can look different for everyone. And so really, I think as clinicians and just as humans, being able to be present for people and to sometimes being able to witness it, because I think that's what it is about grief, is it stirs us up, right? And it's like, just like anything uncomfortable, it's like, oh, it's stirring this stuff up in me. It reminds me of my own mortality. It reminds me of my loved one's mortality. And so it's that big unknown that I think is part of the human experience. And so more than anything, this is a good reminder to me in that it's just like it is part of the human experience. It's one of the parts of the human experience that we may never fully be able to be settled, maybe, and that's okay.
And I think that, just kind of echoing off of what you said, realistically, as clinicians, if somebody came in brand new and it's been 15 years since the death of their family member or loved one, or loss of a big job, because grief is not limited to death. Let's be real.
Yeah.
Or, like, for example, like Katrina, or loss of a house, things like that, those kind of traumas. If someone came in 10 years later after the fact and told you, man, it's been on my mind, I've been really sad about it, how quick as clinicians are we to say they're not over it? Instead of, this is their truth.
Yeah.
Right.
Their experience, this is where they're at. Like, I'm going to meet you there. Like, I understand that these things, these impacts do affect you in a real way. I can't imagine somebody who's lost the home, especially after the flood in Houston. Like, and they just have to
pretend like
they're supposed to just be fine.
So I think that's a good place for us to maybe segue into maybe some resources
Yes.
that you have for people. So, what are some of your favorite? So let's say someone who's gone through grief, in addition to Black Panther psychology. What's a book or a movie or a practice that you recommend for someone who's grieving?
So for clinicians, I would say the bereavement handbook is
Okay.
phenomenal. it,
Okay.
it's about this thick, and
Oh,
it's
okay.
really, really good.
Okay.
It covers so many different topics. It covers culture and age and ethnicity, and it's fantastic. I quoted it so many times in dissertation. I think that's a really easy go-to and a really good book for any clinician to have, just to kind of like skim through and just it's a lot more research minded, so it's not like a friendly read. I would definitely wouldn't say tell a client to read it,
Okay.
but it's really good. If you're working with your clients, something that has been shown to be effective is group therapy first.
Mm-hmm.
So they feel like they have a support group, not only because they feel understood and that they're not alone.
Okay.
There is like research has shown that there's going to be, it's not helpful to an extent, because after a while we're just commiserating.
Okay. So,
So group therapy first, and then seeking out individual therapy.
okay.
And really researching your your psychologist, your clinician, your social worker, really researching them. Say like, what is your background? How do you know about this? How much expertise do you have in the field? Because I know I think it's a really friendly word to say like I work with grief.
Yeah.
You don't really.
Yeah. Okay.
There are lots in Houston specifically. I got trained at Bo's Place, which is fantastic, working with children. Clinicians want to also get information there. They can work there.
Okay.
Bo's Place works with children and adolescents, so it stops at a certain age. There's a lot more programs that are for children and adolescents than there are for adults and middle-aged individuals, unfortunately. And that's something that I've been finding in San Diego, is that we have, San Diego Children Center for Children, and then figure it out.
So those are really good. Those are really
That's helpful.
actionable. Yeah.
Yeah, and then if people want to know more information, the University of Minneapolis is actually like the biggest powerhouse of grief research right now. They have some of the best researchers, individuals. If you guys want to look research articles and stuff like that, like they're really, really phenomenal.
University of Minneapolis. Okay. All right. So that brings us to our wrap up questions. Ask everybody. This has been so rich in information.
Yes.
I definitely learned a lot, and my mind is spinning as to what I got to do next. But Eboni.
Oh, so I thought you were going to do it since you started. So can you tell us why you are a dope therapist?
Because I know that I was 21 and an orphan, and I didn't know how to live my life, and it still affects me. I'm like tearing up thinking about it. Mm-hmm. I had such horrific experiences in mental health. Yeah. And I was just thinking about, here are these little humans of the world who are just trying to figure it out.
Right.
Trying to understand a world that can be unjust and unfair and difficult and happy and exciting and fun and everything in between. And I have a wonderful opportunity to love and support somebody else, and to give them like the nurturing experience to be themselves, to meet them where they're at, and to just be. And I think that we have this amazing ability to touch people, an amazing ability to be 1 hour in their 24 hours of sanity. Figuring it out and being messy and clear as mud and digging and being just figuring it out. It's tough. Like, life sucks sometimes. Sure. And life is hard. And I think that being a clinician is the greatest joy of my life. Like, it is. I have amazing experiences when my clients are finally ready for rehab, or they're stopping their eyes out, or they're like, Brittany, I really need this hour. Or when they're having great days and they're fine. Like when I talk to somebody who is turning, someone I'm working with today is turning 26, and she never thought she was gonna make it to 25.
That's so awesome. I feel like that is exactly what we talk about, which is kind of you're kind of answering our second question, which
Right.
is why we go.
There you go. Yeah.
And there you have it. You get to see these life-changing, you know, turnarounds and points in people's lives. And so this is so wonderful. I mean, I'm just really proud of you. You know, I have an insider kind of view to kind of see your growth and see how far you've come. And so proud of you. Thank you for the work that you're doing. You are changing lives. And this was
How do people stay in touch? How do people follow you and continue to follow your work?
So I am hoping to continue contributing for pop culture therapy. There's a new book coming out. I can't give too much information about that. I'm continue to contribute to. I am planning on contributing to presentations. I am doing an international trip yearly. Continuing to work with collaborative language systems, and then I'm also working with. I presented with AMFT and ASECT, and so I will be continuing to submit to those. And my dissertation I will be defending in October.
good luck.
I will be submitting that for publication by the end of the year.
So if they want to contact you, can they email you or?
I am so old and I still use Hotmail. So old. 30. So it's Oliver1621 at hotmail.com. I'm also on Facebook, which again, I'm old and lame. And I do not have Instagram and I do not have Twitter. So
okay.
All right. Well,
we will make sure to link all that stuff in the bottom. The show notes. So thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate this. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Very honest and open conversations about grief and just how we can help our clients and how other people can support anybody that's going through grief. You can follow us across social media at Melanin and Mental Health, Melanin Health on Twitter. You can also go to melaninandmentalhealth.com to check out the dope therapists that we have there, as well as the merchandise and all the previous podcasts. Anything else we got going on, Elisa?
That's all we got going on.
All right. Bye, y'all. Talk to y'all later.
Bye.
Happy Juneteenth. Bye.
Bye.